Revenge, Book 2 in the New World series. Written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie.
Chapter 10. Messages. The young lieutenant ran from the shuttle to find Meritus discussing provisions with a couple of sergeants. He skidded to a halt breathlessly.
"Excuse me, sir. We've had a message from the New World. Actually, a message from the pod, sir. Signed Alison Coxedge."
Meritus frowned.
"Who?"
The lieutenant shrugged.
"Yes, sir. I had to look her up, sir. Apparently she's a British politician, a minor player. From what we have, she seems to have been on the rise with a small but very vocal following, but was unpopular with the silent majority, sir. You know the type, sir, a media darling who never did well at the polls."
Meritus looked surprised.
"So what was she doing on the Mars mission?"
The lieutenant rubbed his thumb and forefingers together, insinuating she had money behind her.
"Perhaps she saw Mars as a way of fast-tracking her career, sir."
Meritus grunted non-committally.
"All right. What does she want?"
"To open communications, sir. According to her, the military action against us was not sanctioned by what she's calling the people of the New World, and she wants to offer a full and frank apology on behalf of the civilian population and begin peace talks, sir." Meritus's eyebrows shot up.
"Does she now?"
"Apparently so, sir. She's included an encryption so that we can send a return message." Meritus mulled over this unexpected turn of events.
"So, she's working in secret. Sounds like the act of a fool or a coward, or a small number of cowards fearful for their own skins. We might be able to exploit this to our advantage. We seem to have lost Douglas for now, but maybe we can find another way onto the pod, one that doesn't involve blowing the hell out of it."
"Right.
Use the encryption she gave us and send the following message."
"You crashed my ship." Douglas sat with head in hands, shaking it from side to side in utter disbelief. "I can't believe it. After all she's been through." Baines hobbled over to him on crutches, thoughtfully provided by Morecambe Hetfield. "I'm sorry, James. The mission went like a charm. We achieved total surprise, but as the enemy vessel went over the edge, she managed to bring one of her guns to bear, and..." She tailed off. Douglas looked up at her. Seeing the pain in her expression, he softened. "No, Jill. I'm sorry. You did what you had to do and pulled off a miracle in the process. Forgive me. I'd like to hear what happened. All I remember is being thrown upside down." His expression darkened again. "There's something you need to know too. We may have friends on that ship."
"Really?"
Baines was astonished. "Aye. Please tell me about your last few days, and I'll fill in any pieces I can with what little I learned from the enemy camp." Baines spent the next half an hour explaining all that happened since Douglas had surrendered himself to Schultz to save her life. Hetfield and Marston sat in on the conversation too, and gradually a three-sided story began to coalesce. Douglas leant forward, resting his elbow on the rail at the foot of Baines's bed. With his chin in his hand, he spoke thoughtfully. Lieutenant Elizabeth Hemmings was a very brave woman. We should all remember her sacrifice, in case I never get to write it up in a report. There's just one more piece to the puzzle that I haven't told you though, Jill. Jeff Lloyd is alive." Now Baines was staggered.
"What? How?"
Douglas smiled wryly. "The man's got more lives than a whole pride of Moggies, that's how. Remember how concerned you were that we just didn't have the facilities to allow him to reform? Well, just maybe he's doing it all on his own." Baines looked skeptical.
"Really? Why do you say that?"
"We were unable to talk freely during our short confinement together, but I got the distinct impression that he was nae friend to the Schultz's regime. He was in a really bad way when I left. He insisted I leave him behind, not the selfish attitude I would normally have expected from the man."
"He may simply have wanted to stay with them,"
Baines theorized. Douglas shook his head. "No. He was in rough shape even before your attack. But reading between the lines, I think he favors us. To be perfectly honest, the state he was in, I wouldn't have given him long to live, but I've made that mistake before. and I'll no make it again. If it's in any way possible, I'd like to get him back." "A rescue mission? For Lloyd?" Baines could not believe her ears. "Have you forgotten he put us all here?" "No, I haven't, believe it or not," Douglas replied with a touch of asperity. Baines raised her hands placatingly, letting the matter go. "All right, we'll add that to the wish list, shall we?" Douglas nodded. He knew the prospect of pulling Lloyd out was at best hopeful. "Okay," she continued. "We'll need to send a secure message to the New World. I don't want Sandeep doing anything silly like coming to look for me." "Heaven forbid anyone should do anything like that," Douglas jibed. "That was different," Baines answered patiently. "We needed to get you back, James. The New World needs her captain. The Triumvirate needs you too." "Oh, aye, Jill. And I'll bet you a month's back pay that Sandy's thinking exactly the same about you." "I can't let that happen. We're also in need of certain spares and repairs." She directed her next question towards Hetfield, who was taking a deep draught of a wholesome fruit drink he manufactured from local produce. "So while we're wishing for horses, what are the chances of this ship flying again, Moore?" Hetfield coughed, spilling the drink down his chin.
"She did what?"
Major White bellowed, incandescent with rage. Burton felt the need to shrink back.
"All I can tell you for certain is that the message originated in Coxedge's quarters. It was encoded, and we haven't been able to unlock it yet."
"And you're sure it was sent to the enemy?"
White continued at volume.
"It wasn't sent to the New World or any of our operatives in the field. Those are all the facts, Ford. But knowing what a treacherous, lying trout she is—"
White raked his fingers through his hair as he fought to control his anger.
"Right. I think it's about time I called a meeting. Sam, please make an announcement across the PA. Ask everyone to attend embarkation in..."
He checked the pod's chrono.
20 minutes time. I'll keep my personnel at their posts, and I'll get Sarah and Satnam on the horn. Let them know what we're walking into."
Burton nodded and left the security offices. Singh shook Gleason's hand as the Australian and his team boarded the New World. "Well done, sir."
"To both of us, I reckon, mate,"
Gleason greeted warmly in return.
"It's good to see you all made it. We weren't quite so lucky, I'm afraid. We lost Private Jane Ross."
The smile of welcome faded on Singh's face. "I'm very sorry to hear that, Commander."
"Yeah, and me,"
Gleason agreed quietly.
"We managed to retrieve her remains on the way back. I'd like to put them in Dave Flanagan's morgue. I assume he stayed with the pod?"
"Yes, sir, he did. We'll get her placed there straight away. Unfortunately, we've lost track of Captain Baines, too." Gleason stopped in his tracks to turn back questioningly. Singh nodded. "We had an extraordinary message from Captain Douglas."
"He's alive?"
Gleason interrupted urgently. Singh's smile returned. "He was last night. He sent us a coded message saying he'd broken out." Gleason punched the air.
"Yes!"
"More than that, sir. He somehow managed to send us the entire set of blueprints for the Last Word's time-traveling wormhole drive."
"Last Word?"
"That's what they called that black monstrosity," Singh explained. "Catchy name, isn't it? Captain Baines decided to take Lifeboat 1 and find him, sir. That was the last we heard from either of them. Once we lost contact, I wanted to take another lifeboat and search for her, but I was reminded by the crew that my place was here. Now you're here, that's changed, and I intend to leave as soon as I've handed over to you, sir."
Whoa. Hang on a minute, sport. You're the only one who can fly this crate now.
"Not so, sir. Hiro and Giorgio are both capable pilots." Gleason was already shaking his head.
"No, you are the senior bridge officer, Singh. Hell's teeth, you should be in charge of this thing. I'm commander in name only when it comes to the running of this ship. We both know that. Jill Baines gave me the vacant post because she needed you where you were. She also knew my skills would be more useful to her were I in command out there on the ground."
Singh was about to interrupt again, but Gleason cut him off. No, Sandeep. When Captain Baines forced this job on me, she also impressed the need to consider the lives of everyone on the mission. Look, I understand how you feel, and don't think I wouldn't risk my life to save hers, but we must remember all those folks back on the pod. If there's any way this ship will fly again, then I think we'll need to grab the pod and go. And that's going to take some fancy flying, Sunbeam. Nasaki's not half the pilot you are. You're too valuable an asset to waste on a wild goose chase. Singh's comm beeped. Singh?
Captain?
The voice was female. Gleason raised his eyebrows. Singh rolled his eyes. Naval tradition, he whispered. Go ahead, Rose.
We've received an urgent message from Captain Baines. Please return to the bridge.
The officers looked at one another in astonishment. On my way. Singh signed off and they ran. Was that Jim Miller's kid? Gleason panted as they jogged through the ship. Yes, sir. She's been helping out around the ship, doing her best to be useful, you know. When I leave the bridge, I get her to monitor comms. They burst onto the bridge, in unison shouting, Report! Rose turned to face them, pleasantly surprised.
Commander Gleason, you're back.
He gave her a friendly nod and smile. The captain's message? Rose blushed.
Oh, sorry, yeah. It was a very short text message. She says, landed badly, but safe now. Do not send rescue. Repeat, do not send rescue.
And? Singh prompted.
And that's all, Captain. Sorry.
Actually, Rose, now Commander Gleason is here, we should all technically call him Captain. Rose scratched her head.
Seriously?
Singh chuckled. I know, just call me Sandy. It'll be easier all round. Has Baines met up with Douglas? Asked Gleason.
That's all there was, Commander?
Commander will do. Gleason turned away and banged his fist on the back of a seat. Damn it, Jill, we need to know more. She'll be afraid of our comms being intercepted, Singh explained. I think the message is hopeful, though. Gleason spun back quickly. Go on. Firstly, she says she's safe, which is great, but also rather hard to understand, knowing that she's crash-landed out there alone. So? Gleason replied slowly, catching his drift. Maybe she's not alone. Singh nodded. Okay, Rose. Do you know how to encrypt a message? Asked Gleason. Rose shook her head. Not to worry. Sandy will show you how. He nodded to Singh, who leaned on the console at her side. Send a message to Major White. Append the message from Jill Baines to it. As Singh began to explain the operation to the teenager, a message popped in from Major White. He quickly scanned it, then closed his eyes in exasperation. Oh, for crying out loud. Major White stood upon the stage at the front of the embarkation lounge, his expression stern. Thank you all for coming at such short notice, he greeted. I have a couple of announcements for you all. First, the good news. As you will already have heard, Captain Baines and the New World were astonishingly successful in their mission, and the enemy warship has been destroyed. An exultant whoop of adulation for the away team's accomplishments raised the roof, and he allowed the pod personnel their moment of celebration. Not for the first time, he wished he had the Sarge here to calm everyone down. Waving for quiet, he continued. More than that, after the warship died, we received a coded message from none other than Captain Douglas himself. Another roar of approval. White allowed himself a smile. More even than that, and all you technicians will be salivating about this, I'm sure. He managed to send us the plans for that ship's wormhole drive, the one that allowed it to travel through time at will. The most raucous applause yet erupted from the crowd. For the first time, they had hope of returning home. It felt great to deliver good news for a change, and he nodded his understanding, once more raising his hands for quiet. This is an incredible victory for us, against impossible odds, but, unfortunately, my next piece of news is more disappointing. Despicable, even. Someone aboard this pod has sent a coded message to the enemy. A rumble of fury and resentment filled the auditorium. This time, White let them sound off for a while before appealing for calm. It would do no harm to let them work themselves up against the perpetrator. Their anger might well upset them, but if it provided clear perspective on who was and who was not on their side, then so be it. As Miss Coxedge seems to have set herself up as a sort of spokesperson for the civilian population, I invite her to join me up here at the podium. He gestured for her to climb the stage. Please, Miss Coxedge. A spike of nervous tension shot through Coxedge at the use of her name after talk of possible treachery. She controlled it, confident they would not be able to pin anything on her. Even if they did, she would be able to talk it around and make them think she had been acting with everyone's best interests in mind. They also did not need to know about Captain Meritus's return message, unless it furthered her purposes. There was much agitation now, and someone shouted, "That broad doesn't represent me!" White singled out Hank Bernstein, and his lip twisted into a half-smile. Coxedge strode confidently onto the stage. "Thank you, Major White. Naturally, we're all very relieved to hear that Captain Douglas still lives. That's if this message is true." White held up a hand, interrupting her. "Excuse me, Miss Coxedge. Can I stop you there? You weren't invited here to speak. You're here to answer for the crime of sending out unauthorized coded messages to the enemy." The crowd exploded. Daylight was fading, growing darker still under the forest canopy. Dr. Heidi Schultz's band walked the heavy vehicle tracks left by Gleason and Thomas's combined units. They were not hard to follow. Since their forced expulsion by the traitor Meritus, her 12 acolytes had begun to leave her alone, afraid to approach, and that was how they had travelled for most of the day. She raised her arm, closing her fist. "We make camp here tonight." She led them a further 100 meters into the forest, away from the wide trail and any large-scale dangers it might deliver to their camp. She spotted a likely tree and scrambled up. Once secure, in the crook of a large branch, she ordered her people to get off the ground. "And keep your boots on. Use your rations carefully. Cold food only, no fires. We move again at dawn." Schultz found their situation humiliating and insulting to her dignity. After millions of years of evolution, they were back up in the trees again, this time long before their species had even taken to them. She pointedly did not join in the round of arboreal goodnights. She was livid, and someone, perhaps everyone, would pay. Meritus lay down on his temporary bunk aboard the New World shuttle. Out in the camp around him, many field tents provided token visual cover and protection from the elements, but he remained concerned about another large predator incursion, especially in the dark, where any situation might become chaotic. So, taking inspiration from the wagon trains that crossed America's Old West during the 19th century, he had ordered his last attack ship to land parallel with the shuttle. Using his 3 remaining armored vehicles, he parked 2 of them nose to tail at one end, creating a box. The third, he parked at the opposite end, closing the remaining gap with salvaged security fence panels to create a guarded gateway. Most of the seriously injured were already within the ship's or vehicle's holds. Everyone else was under canvas, making the most of what protection they had. The team sent to strip everything they could from the last word advised against moving people back aboard the ruin at this time, despite the ship's armor being proof against any large animal incursions. There were concerns about the possibility of secondary explosions. Determined to set a new precedent, Meritus consciously stepped away from the Schultz model and listened to his people before making decisions. Their warning was sensible and based on observation, so he abided by it. Nevertheless, sleep eluded him. Schultz was still out there somewhere.
Maybe I should have just ended her, he thought. But then I would have begun our new era with an act of murder. If I want these people to trust my leadership, rather than fear it, I can't afford to send messages like that. I've promised martial law, not the fickle whims of a dictator. Even so, I'd have been better off putting her down.
He turned over and plumped up his pillow with a fist.
Hope I don't regret letting her go. She'll most likely go to ground until their relief force arrives with her grandfather. At least, that's what I'd do. But you never can tell with her. She's unstable.
He knew she had visited the last word before he threw her out, but did not know why. That fact had also been keeping him from sleep. He sat up suddenly, banging his head off the upper bunk.
Lieutenant!
He cried, rubbing his head. The duty officer ran through the shuttle, down to the bunks they had set up in its cargo bay.
Yes, sir.
Moans came from the injured around him, and Meritus suddenly felt like an ass. He quickly donned his boots and led the young lieutenant from the room, apologizing to the people he had disturbed as they made their way to the small bridge.
Lieutenant, are we scanning for comm traffic?
Yes, sir. We've picked up transmissions too, but we've so far had no luck in decoding them. I didn't want to disturb you until we had, but we are working on them, sir. Perhaps if we had our equipment.
Meritus nodded. They all lamented the loss of the last word.
I understand. Have you picked up any other signals?
The younger man frowned, not following.
We're only scanning for comm signals, sir. Have we missed something?
Meritus nodded confidently.
Maybe. Take your station, Lieutenant. Check for any signals coming from the last word.
Surprise showed on the young man's face, but he obeyed immediately and without comment. After a few moments going through menus, he set up the desired parameters and leaned back in his seat.
Whoa! What is it?
Meritus snapped urgently.
Looks like the balloon's gone up, sir.
AD 2112, Patagonia. The old man watched tropical rain hammer the forest below from his eyrie, built high up on the side of a rocky promontory. His curved window bubbled out from the fortress's southern wall, boasting a spectacular 180-degree view. This part of the rainforest, and all that he could see, was his personal domain. Not that it was fit for human habitation. Some of the deadliest creatures in the world lived just outside his window. But, as Heinrich Schultz abhorred visitors, this worked for him. His thoughts focused on his granddaughter, temporarily trapped almost 100 million years in the past. For all he knew, she might be standing right where he stood now, all that time ago. Of his extensive family, she had always been by far the most promising. One day, he hoped she would succeed him as mistress of his glorious new race, although she was his second choice. He would have preferred a male heir. Operation Dawn was now well underway, so maybe this would change things. Despite being out of contact with his most valuable assets for some time, he had little doubt that they would be performing to the level of excellence he demanded from them. He also had no doubt that the very sight of his last word would bring the New World's mongrel rabble to heel. Such a motley group would have neither the courage, commitment, nor strong leadership necessary to resist his plans. Schultz did not trust anyone, but he knew Meritus, for a strong and resourceful leader, had chosen him for those and other qualities. It was unfortunate the man's commitment to the purity of their cause was so weak. He suspected Meritus saw the whole venture as merely a way of saving a small portion of the human race. As a native Canadian, it would have been the only way to save himself, certainly, and a few of his people after Canada left the Mars program under a cloud. The political rift opened between Canada and the US had been useful, but the world of the 22nd century was doomed, and everyone knew it.
A pragmatist, then, Schultz considered. But he will carry out my orders proficiently until I arrive to take command. After that, we shall just have to see.
He knew that the qualities he distrusted in Meritus were actually the reasons he had decided to trust him in the first place. Had he given the last word and the mission to someone like himself, he would simply have set up another warlord who no longer needed him. Meritus, on the other hand, had a naive sense of honor, and that was most useful.
The ships making up the rest of his fleet were not yet complete, although they were close. Ultimately, he had access to time machines, so he could invade the past at will, the date of departure irrelevant. Yet, there was always the danger of some past event changing his present. He understood this to be the greatest risk of their whole enterprise, so he had worked his people hard. Harder than usual, he admitted to himself with a quirk of rare amusement. The large, beautifully carved doors to his private study buzzed softly. He frowned, turning slowly to face them. "Enter!" They opened to admit his aide. "Yes?" She gave a slight bow. "I apologize for disturbing you, sir, but we have received the temporal signal." Heinrich Schultz smiled, and it very nearly reached his eyes. "To what crime exactly do you refer, Major? I have committed none." Coxedge treated him to her maddening politician's smile.
We know that a coded message was sent to the enemy camp, and it originated in your quarters.
White spoke clearly for all to hear, though the assembled passengers and pod staff were highly agitated, and it took a while for the rumblings to die down.
And before you say anything further, we've checked the logs, and yes, you were in your quarters when the message was sent, and alone.
Coxedge smiled again, turning to the populace. "My friends, did we not decide at our last meeting that sending a message requesting a peaceful dialogue was our best course of action? I simply carried out my promise to you, the people." As was becoming the norm, Bernstein stood and shouted,
That's just a bunch of BS. I never agreed to it. Same goes for most of us here.
White nodded.
Mr. Bernstein is correct. You took this upon yourself, Miss Coxedge, to further your ambitions. Or was it simply an attempt at collaboration to save your own skin?
Coxedge kept her maddening smile in place. "My dear friends, this is nonsense. I have only kept my word to you all. Major White is simply using the situation to sublimate his recent unprovoked attack upon my person. Furthermore, this is just another example of the military once again trying to curtail our freedoms. If this continues—"
Can it, lady?
White snapped, his temper flashing.
You sent a coded message to an enemy who are here with the sole intention of casting us out of our home to die. You committed an act of treason against our society, and you're not going to double-talk your way out of it.
Loud applause followed, and for a moment Coxedge looked less sure of herself. She knew it was time to roll the dice. "They accepted my offer of a meeting." Her outburst brought an immediate silence over embarkation. Rebecca Mawar, psychic and medium, and a so-called paid seat, was taking a little air. The teenagers had paved the way by going for a stroll outside just before the hurricane a week earlier, and now several passengers were following in their steps, taking short walks around the compound. She shook her head sadly. What a couple of days it had been. It was hard to imagine that a battle had taken place just 50 kilometers away and only yesterday. They had lost people. Furthermore, a reprisal was expected imminently, and added to that, someone had attempted to make a secret deal with the enemy. She closed her eyes against such thoughts. We're a curse upon this earth. Yet, the evening was balmy and beautiful. She opened them again to a sky that was deep blue under a brilliant new moon. Breathing deeply, in and out, her heart slowed as she opened her feelings to the world around her. Peace. You are all going to die. Mawar's breath caught, and she turned sharply. She was alone. Who's there? You know who I am. Mario? She called out with her mind. Help me. Instantly, she felt the familiar warmth around her shoulders and knew she was no longer alone. The demon laughed and was gone. Hero was shattered. Giorgio had practically forced him to take a break and get some food. Now he slumped at a table in the staff mess, while Rose placed a plate of something warm in front of him. I'm sorry, I don't have much experience with cooking. He nodded, absently grateful, and tried a few mouthfuls. It was not very good.
but he hardly noticed, his mind too exhausted. How am I going to get this ship to fly again in the time we have? The next instant, he was being shaken. "Hero?" The chief raised his head, while some type of cold broth trickled into his eyes. "Huh?" he managed to utter. Singh laughed, offering him a towel. "How long have you been asleep in your bowl? Back in India, I once owned a beagle who did that. Used to get it all over his ears." "I've only just sat down." "Really?" Hero looked down at the mess on the table and his uniform. His ears were about the only part of him not covered in food. He groaned, taking the proffered towel. "Fantastic." After cleaning himself up as best he could, he turned his efforts towards wiping the table. Now more or less awake, he admitted, "I was dreaming about Captain Douglas." "I'm sure he'll be flattered." "Shut up, Sandy. I'm serious. He had just arrived with a load of spare parts and a work crew." Hero sighed. "Fat chance of anything like that coming my way anytime soon."
"Shouldn't we at least wait till morning to try this?" Hetfield asked, barely controlled panic in his voice. "She hasn't been in the air for nearly 50 years. What's another few hours, for God's sake?" "We can't wait," Douglas retorted brusquely. "If this doesn't work, we need to know now, and I'll need to find another way back so we can get help. According to Jill, there are parts on this ship that are desperately needed." "That's the trouble with you kids," Hetfield muttered grouchily. "Always in a rush to be someplace. And what the hell do you mean by parts? The Newfoundland's our ship, and she's been our home for most of our lives. She's not some junkyard prize." Douglas softened a little. "I know more. I do understand, but we've lives at stake." He grinned. "Did you just call me a kid? You do realize that a few weeks ago I was nearly twice your age. That was a long time ago for some of us, son. And now you come busting into my trailer wanting to take it for a ride?" Douglas laughed, and eventually Hetfield did too. "Okay, Pop," Douglas replied kindly. "I'm sorry, but we really need to know if this is going to work." Hetfield looked across the Newfoundland's bridge to where Marston was seated at a science station. She smiled sadly and nodded. Hetfield gave up. "All right, Captain. Have it your way, but go easy on her. She's an old lady now. I know how she feels." Douglas had the pilot station, with Baines in the captain's chair behind him. "This is new," she commented dryly. Douglas gave her one of his winning smiles. "Where to, Captain?" She gave a foppish wave. "Home, James, naturally."
That signal was meant to be sent after the New World was ours.
Meritus was almost speaking to himself.
This is not good. If Old Man Schultz gets here and finds us in this state, his battleship in pieces and his precious granddaughter in exile, he won't bother to hear our story. He'll execute us all before he even bothers to land.
"Shall I order a small team to deactivate the signal, sir?" the lieutenant asked nervously. Meritus shook his head.
"No. That will only endanger more of our people. Besides, the damage is done now. If that signal has been broadcasting all day, it will have been received. We need to assume that Operation Dawn's second wave are on their way. Damn!"
He slammed his fist down on a console. "Should we move out, sir?"
"Yes, I think we must. Damn it all. I wanted everyone arrested."
Meritus thought hard for a moment.
"Okay, how many people can we move in the ships and land vehicles?"
"We could probably squeeze 50 into this shuttle, sir, if we removed the bunks. The attack ship is only designed to drop a small contingent, but we could maybe pack a dozen troops into her. The armored personnel carriers can carry 12 in relative ease, but comfort aside, we might get 20 into each. It won't be pleasant, but..." Meritus nodded.
"Room for 122, and as there are only 90 of us, we may be able to pull this off."
"But, sir, we have 27 wounded. They'll need a lot more space. Do we leave them behind, sir?"
Meritus stared at the lieutenant, whose name was Weber.
An obvious graduate from one of Schultz's youth training programs.
He thought sourly.
We do not, Lieutenant. At least not in the way I believe you're suggesting. We will leave them, but with the land vehicles, a small support staff, and a heavily armed guard. I will take a shock team of 40 fit individuals, including myself. I will co-pilot the attack ship while you will command this shuttle, Lieutenant.
The young man stood and clicked his heels in salute. Meritus acknowledged his salute.
Let them all rest for 2 more hours, and then we make our preparations to leave.
Revenge, Book 2 in the New World series. Written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. New installments are uploaded weekly. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like or comment. Visit the link in the description for free New World companion stories, available for download as ebooks.